For the second July in a row, the Texas Hill Country is underwater. A slow-moving storm system has dropped more than 20 inches of rain across south-central Texas, more than 500 millimeters, sending rivers to record heights, tearing out a bridge, and forcing evacuations across a region that is still rebuilding from last year's disaster. As of the most recent verified updates, on the 20th of July, state and local officials have confirmed 2 deaths. More than 2.5 million people were in the path of the rain. Governor Greg Abbott has declared a state of emergency for 59 counties. This is still an active emergency. In parts of Uvalde County, the water is rising, and downstream communities are being told to move to higher ground. The warnings came early. Forecasters with the National Weather Service began briefing local officials on conference calls on Sunday, the 12th of July, a full day before the rain started, to spread the word that heavy storms were coming. Jason Runyon, a warning coordination meteorologist with the Weather Service Office for the Austin and San Antonio region, said the approach was the same one used in 2025. Escalate flash flood warnings to flash flood emergencies where lives were at risk. A flash flood emergency is the Weather Service's highest flood alert, issued only in the rare cases where flooding is already threatening people directly. This time, the warnings did not stand alone. After last year, the state required new warning sirens in flood-prone areas, and the Upper Guadalupe River Authority had installed 6 sirens in Kerr County. 3 of them were activated during this event. A new public dashboard, tracking rainfall and river levels in real time, had gone live just weeks earlier, in June. The rain began on Monday, the 13th of July, and then it stopped moving. A storm system stalled over south-central Texas and drew in a deep supply of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. When a system stalls like this, it keeps unloading rain on the same ground instead of passing through. The heaviest rain on Tuesday developed in rural Uvalde County, then spread across the Hill Country and into central Texas over the following days. The most intense totals fell first in Kinney and Uvalde counties, and then in Kerr and Gillespie counties. Rain gauges in Uvalde, Kerr, Real, and Guadalupe counties measured more than 20 inches since Monday. According to federal scientists cited by the National Weather Service, totals like that in those locations have only about a 0.2% chance of happening in any given year, roughly a 1 in 500-year event. In the worst-hit spots, more than 2 feet of rain fell over 3 days. The peak hourly rate topped out around 4 inches an hour, lower than the rates in 2025, but it came down again and again on ground that could no longer absorb it. All of that water had to go somewhere. This part of Texas is nicknamed Flash Flood Alley, because its thin, rocky soils and steep terrain send rainfall racing into narrow river valleys instead of soaking in. The ground was already saturated from earlier rounds of rain, which means it could absorb almost nothing, so each new downpour ran straight off into the rivers. The result was a series of violent, fast rises. Near Comfort, the Guadalupe River, measured by a river gauge that records how high the water is, went from about 5.5 feet at 5 in the morning to more than 37 feet by just after 8 on Thursday. That reading edged past the level the same river reached during the deadly 2025 flood. Near Kerrville, the Guadalupe surged more than 34 feet in under 2 hours before it began to recede. At Centerpoint, another gauge on the Guadalupe rose about 32 feet in 4 hours. The Guadalupe was not the only river to break loose. The Pedernales River near Fredericksburg rose to about 34 feet, up from around 5 feet in the weeks before. The Frio River reached one of its 5 highest crests on record. The crest is the highest point the water reaches before it starts to fall. And the Nueces River, below Uvalde, crested at a record 28.01 feet, surpassing a mark that had stood since 1996. Governor Abbott said that at its peak, the Nueces was flowing at roughly twice the rate of Niagara Falls. On Thursday, the 16th of July, the National Weather Service warned before dawn of large and deadly flood waves moving down the region's rivers. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Weather Prediction Center raised parts of the Hill Country to a Level 4 out of 4 flash flood risk, the top of its scale, with a broader Level 3 risk around it. At least 5 flash flood emergencies were issued that day alone. By Friday, new ones were declared for the Ozona area in Crockett County and Sonora in Sutton County, with part of Interstate 10 inside the zone. For the people in those valleys, the rises left little time. In Center Point, an unincorporated community in Kerr County, the first alert one volunteer firefighter received went out around 2:40 in the morning on Thursday. Crews there responded to dozens of distress calls, pulling people from homes, cars, trees, and the tops of RVs. Near Kerrville, 10 people were rescued by helicopter from the roof of a barn. In Uvalde, police went door to door on Wednesday morning evacuating neighborhoods, reported at least 25 water rescues, and watched part of the city cut off when a creek called Taylor Slough overtopped its banks. The Comfort RV Resort was evacuated. The floodwaters also tore into infrastructure. The Texas Department of Transportation reported that by Thursday afternoon, at least 125 roadways had been hit and at least 87 closed. A barge struck the Sidney Baker Bridge in Kerrville. And on Friday, the farm-to-market 481 bridge south of Uvalde collapsed, cutting a key connection between Uvalde and Eagle Pass. The state's response was large, and it had been set in motion before the worst of the rain. Governor Abbott activated the Texas National Guard and deployed Black Hawk helicopters and rescue teams starting on Tuesday. In total, the state mobilized about 2,350 responders, more than 1,400 vehicles, 85 boats, and 21 aircraft. State teams rescued more than 270 people, and local officials in Uvalde and nearby areas rescued more than 300. On Saturday, the 18th of July, President Donald Trump approved Abbott's request for a major disaster declaration covering 28 of the affected counties, a step that unlocks federal assistance for recovery. Abbott encouraged Texans to support the effort through the Rebuild Texas Fund. The region's own community foundation of the Texas Hill Country, which raised $150 million after last year's flood, opened a new relief fund as well. As of the 20th of July, the confirmed death toll stands at 2. State and local officials say one person was swept away while driving across a flooded roadway in Uvalde County. The second, John Mark Stewart, 65 years old, of Kerrville, was swept away in an RV near Comfort, along the Guadalupe River. Both deaths came on Thursday, the day the rivers peaked. The damage to homes and businesses is still being counted. Preliminary assessments identified damage to at least 490 homes and 100 businesses in Kerr County, about 100 homes in neighboring Kendall County, and dozens more across Zavala County. In Kerrville, floodwaters reached neighborhoods that had escaped last year's flood entirely, catching longtime residents by surprise. Officials and scientists point to one main difference from last year. On the 4th of July 2025, flooding along the Guadalupe killed more than 130 people, including 28 connected to the Camp Mystic summer camp. That flood came from a single, intense burst of overnight rain that struck upstream while people slept. This year's disaster was spread across days, across multiple river basins, and much of it fell in daylight. Greg Waller, a hydrologist with the Weather Service's West Gulf River Forecast Center, put it this way: the Guadalupe River last year, it all came down at once. This one almost looks like a football game. There's the first quarter, then there's the second quarter. It's spread out. That spread gave forecasters and emergency crews something they had not had in 2025: lead time. Nick Fang, a flood warning expert at the University of Texas at Arlington, said the storm's slower evolution let responders recognize the threat before it reached the hardest-hit communities. Early flood warning doesn't start with the sirens, Fang said, but starts with the science. Kerrville Mayor Joe Herring said the new tools saved lives yesterday, without a doubt. Scientists are careful about what this pattern means. Daniel Swain, a climate scientist, described both the 2025 and 2026 storms as extreme events with a low probability of occurring, driven by high levels of water vapor in the atmosphere and conditions primed for slow-moving storms. It's a familiar flavor, Swain said, but the magnitude really is in some cases exceeding what we've seen historically, and it is really notable the same place has seen this in 2 consecutive years. He cautioned that back-to-back years are partly random chance. Last year happening, he said, does not lower the odds of this year. The region has seen consecutive floods before. In 1935, the Guadalupe at Comfort rose to 36 feet, then to 34 feet the following year. As the state climatologist, John Nielsen Gammon, said, "The main lesson is that this can happen again, and no one will know exactly when." As of the most recent verified update, on the 20th of July, the immediate rescue phase has largely given way to recovery. Residents from Kerrville to Uvalde County are returning to damaged homes, and volunteer groups are organizing donation drives and cleanup crews. But the danger is not over. Governor Abbott said the state's greatest concern remains along the Nueces River, where evacuations continued in parts of Uvalde County as the water slowly receded. Farther south, the Rio Grande was rising toward Laredo. In Batesville, about 20 miles south of Uvalde, historic floodwaters had swept through the town, where volunteers, some of them flood victims themselves, spent the weekend handing out food and clothing to their neighbors. Abbott warned that clear skies overhead do not mean the threat has passed. Downstream, the waters will continue to rise and continue to pose dangers for those local communities, he said, pointing to the next 48 to 72 hours. For the people of the Texas Hill Country, this is the second July in 2 years that flooding has struck the region, and many were still rebuilding from the last one. As one Kerrville resident, Rosalinda Torres, said after losing her home, "I lost everything. But I'm alive. That's a good thing." The water is still moving downstream, and the full count of the damage and the cost is not yet finished. Subscribe for more informative reports.